There's a heaviness you feel sometimes, a sadness that doesn't quite belong to anything you've done. You search your memory for its origin, but you find nothing. And yet, it's there, pressing against your chest like an old, familiar ghost. You wake up some mornings already tired, not from lack of sleep, but from something deeper, something older. You carry tension in places you didn't know could hold it. Your shoulders, your jaw, the space between your thoughts. You've learned to call it stress, anxiety, depression, and maybe it is. But have you ever considered that some of what you feel didn't start with you? Think about the last time you felt inexplicably sad. Not because something bad happened. Not because you were rejected or failed or lost something. Just sad, a quiet, unnamed grief that settled over you like fog. You tried to trace it back. You asked yourself, why do I feel this way? And the mind, ever eager to solve, began constructing answers. It pointed to your job, your relationship, your body, your choices. It found reasons. But none of them felt quite right, because the mind doesn't know how to say, this isn't yours. We inherit more than eye color and bone structure. We inherit silence. We inherit unspoken fears. We inherit the things our parents couldn't process, our grandparents couldn't name, our ancestors couldn't release. Trauma, you see, doesn't just live in the person who experienced it. It echoes. It reverberates through generations, like a song no one remembers learning. But everyone hums. Your grandmother never spoke about the war, but you feel restless in quiet rooms. Your father never cried. But you've spent your life swallowing feelings until they became stones in your stomach. Your mother smiled through everything. And now you can't tell the difference between peace and pretending. This is the inheritance no one tells you about. The emotional estate passed down in whispers, in what wasn't said at the dinner table, in the way love was given or withheld. And you, without knowing it, became the keeper of all that unfinished business. The Sufis have a teaching, you are not the river. You are the water flowing through. What they mean is this: you are not a fixed, isolated self. You are a continuation, a living bridge between what came before and what comes after. Your body is made of atoms that once belonged to stars. Your thoughts are shaped by languages you didn't invent. Your fears, your longings, your patterns, they didn't begin the day you were born. You are the culmination of 1,000 stories you never heard. And some of the pain you carry, it was never meant for you to solve. It was only meant for you to feel, to acknowledge, and finally, to release. Science is beginning to understand what mystics have always known. Epigenetics shows us that experiences, especially traumatic ones, can alter gene expression. These changes can be passed down. A grandmother who survived famine may pass on a heightened stress response. A grandfather who lived through violence may pass on hypervigilance. Not through stories or teachings, through biology itself. The body remembers what the mind forgets. So when you feel that inexplicable heaviness, consider this: you might be carrying someone else's unfinished grief, their unexpressed rage, their silenced fear. And the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself and for them is to finally let it move through you. Sit quietly for a moment. Close your eyes if you can. Bring your attention to a feeling you've carried for as long as you can remember. Maybe it's a sense of not being enough. Maybe it's fear of abandonment. Maybe it's a vague guilt you can't explain. Now ask yourself, is this really mine? Not as a judgment, not as an escape, but as an honest inquiry. Whose voice does that fear sound like? Whose wound does that shame resemble? You don't need to know the full story. You don't need to analyze or understand everything. You only need to recognize this came from somewhere, and I have the power to let it go, take a breath, and as you exhale, imagine releasing just a little of that weight. Not because you're rejecting your family or your past, but because you're honoring it by refusing to let it define your future. You can love your lineage and still refuse to carry their pain forward. The pain you carry isn't all yours. And realizing that isn't a betrayal. It's a liberation. You are not here to be a graveyard for feelings that were never processed. You are here to be a garden, to take what was buried and let it finally bloom into something new. So put it down. Not all at once, not perfectly, but gently, slowly, with the understanding that you were never meant to carry the weight of the world or your family. On your own, you are lighter than you think and freer than you've been taught to believe. You've been living a story someone else wrote, acting out scenes from a script you didn't choose. And the strangest part, you've forgotten it's a performance. You think it's just who you are. There's a moment in every person's life when they realize they've been living on autopilot, going through motions they never questioned, believing things they never examined, wanting things they were told to want. You chased success because that's what you were supposed to do. You stayed quiet because that's what kept the peace. You made yourself smaller because that's what made you lovable. And one day you wake up and realize, I don't know who I am without these patterns. Because the patterns aren't just habits, they're identities. They're the roles you were assigned before you could speak. The good child, the responsible one, the peacemaker, the achiever, the invisible one. These roles served a purpose once. They helped you survive a family system that needed you to be a certain way. They helped you navigate a world that rewarded compliance and punished authenticity. But now they've become cages. You still play the responsible one, even though no one needs saving anymore. You still stay quiet, even though there's no danger in speaking. You still make yourself small, even though there's no one left to placate. The role outlived its usefulness, but you kept playing. Because without it, who would you be? This is the fear that lives beneath all the others. If I let go of who I've been, will there be anything left? And the answer, terrifying and liberating in equal measure, is this: yes, there will be you, the real you, the one who's been waiting beneath the performance all along. The philosopher Alan Watts once said, "You are under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago, but we act as if we are. We cling to old versions of ourselves like life rafts. We defend outdated beliefs like they're sacred. We repeat the same patterns, even when they hurt us, because at least they're familiar. This is not loyalty. This is fear. We're afraid that change means death. That letting go of who we've been means losing ourselves entirely. But that's not how it works. A river doesn't die when it changes course. A tree doesn't betray itself when it sheds its leaves. You are not abandoning yourself when you evolve. You're finally becoming yourself. The stories you've been living, the ones about who you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to want, how you're supposed to feel, they're not true. They never were. They're just interpretations. Narratives constructed in childhood to make sense of a confusing world. And they worked. They helped you survive. But survival and living are not the same thing. To survive, you needed to fit in, to be accepted, to avoid punishment or rejection. So you learned to read the room, to anticipate needs, to contort yourself into whatever shape was required. To live, though, to truly live, you need to do the opposite. You need to stop performing and start being. And that requires something radical. The willingness to disappoint people, not out of cruelty, but out of honesty. Because every time you say yes when you mean no, you betray yourself. Every time you shrink to make someone else comfortable, you abandon your own truth. Every time you stay silent to keep the peace, you choose their approval over your integrity. And slowly, imperceptibly, you become a stranger to yourself. Here's a question that will change everything. If you let it, what would I do if I weren't afraid of being judged? Sit with that. Really sit with it. What would you say? What would you pursue? How would you dress? Who would you love? What would you walk away from? Write it down if you need to. Not for anyone else, just for you. And then notice what comes up. Notice the voice that says, but that's selfish. But people will think I'm strange. But I'll be alone. But I'll fail. That voice. It's not your intuition. It's the old story, fighting to stay alive. And you don't have to destroy it. You don't have to go to war with it. You just have to stop believing it's the only truth. Start small. Say one thing you've been afraid to say. Make one choice based on what you want, not what's expected. Spend 1 hour doing something that has no purpose other than joy. You don't need to burn your life down. You just need to stop building it according to someone else's blueprint. The stories you've been living aren't wrong. They were just outgrown. And there's a kind of grief in that. Letting go of who you've been is a death of sorts. But it's also a birth. You don't have to be the person you were. You don't have to carry the roles you were given. You are allowed to become something new. Not because the old you was bad, but because the real you, the one beneath the performance, has been waiting for this moment your entire life. And it's finally time to meet them. The loudest thing in your house isn't the television. It isn't the arguments. It's the silence. The things no one says. The feelings no one names. The truth everyone tiptoes around. Every family has a silence. It's the thing everyone knows but no one mentions. The addiction that's called stress. The marriage that's called fine. The grief that's called the past. It hovers in the air during holiday dinners. It makes eye contact uncomfortable. It turns vulnerability into danger. And you learn early on that speaking into that silence was not safe. Maybe you tried once. You named the tension. You asked the question everyone was avoiding, and the room went cold, or someone got angry, or you were told, we don't talk about that. Stop being dramatic. Why do you have to ruin everything? So you stopped. You learned to carry what couldn't be spoken. You became fluent in the unspoken language of your family, the tight smiles, the subject changes, the everything's fine when nothing was. And now, years later, you notice something. You've brought that silence with you. You don't talk about your feelings. Not really. You deflect with humor. You minimize with, I'm fine. You change the subject when things get too real. You think you're protecting others. But really, you're protecting that old rule, don't disturb the peace. Don't make waves. Don't be too much. This is how pain perpetuates itself. Not through violence or cruelty. Through silence. Through what we refuse to acknowledge. The psychologist Carl Jung said, what you resist persists. And what families resist, most of all, is truth. Not out of malice. Out of love, actually. A misguided love that believes protection means pretending. That believes if we don't name the pain, maybe it will disappear. But pain doesn't disappear. It metastasizes. The shame your father never processed becomes the anger you can't control. The grief your mother never expressed becomes the numbness you mistake for strength. The fear your grandparents lived with becomes the anxiety you carry without understanding why. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It just spreads the wound. And the most radical thing you can do for yourself, for your family, for the generations that come after you, is to finally speak, not to blame, not to accuse. but to tell the truth about what you've carried, what you've felt, what's been too heavy to hold alone. This is not betrayal, this is healing. Because when one person breaks the silence, they give everyone else permission to do the same. You are not responsible for fixing your family's dysfunction. You are not obligated to drag everyone into therapy. You don't have to make them understand. But you do have to stop pretending. You do have to stop contorting yourself to maintain a false peace. You do have to honor your own truth, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Because your voice matters, your experience matters, and your silence, your continued participation in the family myth, costs you your life. Think of something you've never said out loud, something you've carried in secret, something you were taught, implicitly or explicitly, never to name. It might be, I was lonely growing up, or I felt invisible, or I'm still angry about what happened, or simply I'm not okay. You don't have to announce it at the dinner table. You don't have to confront anyone, but say it, out loud, even if you're alone. Say it to a therapist. Say it to a journal. Say it to a trusted friend. Say it to the mirror. Break the spell of silence. Shatter the illusion that naming pain makes it worse, because the opposite is true. Naming pain is the first step in releasing it. And you'll notice something miraculous. The moment you stop hiding, the weight gets lighter. The moment you stop pretending, you can finally breathe. You might lose some people when you start telling the truth. Not everyone wants healing. Not everyone is ready to face what they've avoided. And that's okay. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Your freedom is. The silence you were taught to keep was never about protecting anyone. It was about maintaining a system that was already broken. And you, by speaking, by refusing to continue the charade, are not breaking your family. You're breaking a cycle. You're saying, this ends with me. The silence, the pretending, the carrying what wasn't mine, it ends here. That's not cruelty. That's courage. And it's the most loving thing you can do. You can't change the past. You can't undo what was done to you, or to them, or to anyone who came before. But you can change what happens next. And that changes everything. There's a moment when you realize you're no longer just healing for yourself. You're healing for everyone who came before you and everyone who comes after. You're the one who breaks the cycle. The one who says, this stops here. And it's exhausting, because it means you're carrying the weight of transformation. You're doing the emotional work your parents didn't do. The inner work your grandparents didn't know was possible. You're sitting in therapy, reading books, meditating, crying, journaling, processing, all while others judge you for thinking too much or living in the past. But you know better. You know this isn't indulgence. This is survival. This is evolution. You are the transition generation, the bridge between unconscious repetition and conscious choice. And yes, it's lonely, because not everyone will understand. Some will resist your growth. They'll see your healing as judgment of their choices, your boundaries as rejection, your peace as betrayal. They'll ask, why can't you just let it go? Why do you have to dwell on this? We turned out fine. And you'll want to scream, but we didn't. We learned to function, yes, but we didn't learn to feel. We didn't learn to connect. We didn't learn to be whole. But you won't scream, because you've learned something they haven't, that healing isn't about making others wrong. It's about making a different choice. There's a concept in indigenous wisdom called 7th generation thinking. The idea that every decision you make should consider its impact 7 generations into the future. Most of us can barely think beyond tomorrow. But this perspective asks, what world am I creating for people I'll never meet? And that's what you're doing, even if you don't realize it. Every pattern you break, every wound you heal, every truth you speak, it ripples forward. Your great-great-grandchildren won't know your name, but they'll benefit from your courage. Because when you refuse to pass down the shame you inherited, you give them the gift of worthiness. When you learn to express feelings instead of suppress them, you give them emotional intelligence. When you choose presence over perfection, you give them permission to be human. This is the work of an ancestor. Not someone who's dead, but someone who understands they're part of a continuum. Someone who takes responsibility, not just for their own life, but for the legacy they leave. And here's the beautiful paradox. In becoming the ancestor you needed, you also heal the child you were. That young version of you who felt unseen, unheard, unloved, they're still inside you, watching, waiting to see if you'll finally give them what they needed. And when you set boundaries, when you honor your truth, when you choose yourself without guilt, you're not just protecting your future. You're redeeming your past. You're telling that child, I see you now. I hear you now. I will not abandon you the way others did. Close your eyes and imagine your descendants. Not your literal children, necessarily, but the generations that will come after you. The ones who will inherit the world you shape with your choices. What do you want them to receive from you? What legacy do you want to leave in your lineage? Do you want them to inherit fear or resilience? Do you want them to inherit shame or self-acceptance? Do you want them to inherit silence or the courage to speak? Now ask yourself, am I living in a way that creates that legacy? Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but directionally. Are you moving toward the person you want to be remembered as? Or are you still operating from old patterns because they're comfortable? This isn't about pressure. It's about purpose. You are not here by accident. You are not just surviving. You are creating. With every choice, every word, every moment of courage or avoidance, you are authoring the future. And you have more power than you think. The pain you carry isn't all yours. And the healing you do isn't just for you. You are the link between what was and what will be, the hinge on which history turns, the moment when unconscious repetition becomes conscious evolution. And that's sacred work. Not because you're special, but because you chose it. You chose to stop, to look, to feel, to change. You chose to be the ancestor you needed. And in doing so, you've given everyone, past, present, and future, a gift, the possibility of freedom. So carry on. Not because the work is easy, but because you are the right person for it. You always were. The pain you carry isn't all yours, but the peace you create, that's entirely yours to give, to yourself, to your lineage, to the world. And it starts the moment you decide, this ends with me, and something new begins.